Hello everybody and welcome to the Cyclical Investors Club YouTube channel. My name is Corey Kramer and normally on this channel most of the time I spend analyzing individual stocks from the S&P 500. Today I'm going to do the fourth part of a playlist I'm putting together for newer investors or investors who aren't used to analyzing individual stocks, where I share just some general tips, guidelines, things to avoid and do when investing in stocks. And the first installment of those was about focusing on earnings and earnings growth. The second one was about focusing on the medium term, and especially instead of the short term, so more like 5 years into the future or so. And the last one was about avoiding turnarounds. So this is going to be the fourth one, and this one is about inverting your thinking when it comes to identifying potential stocks that you want to do more research on or potentially buy. So usually people come across ideas to buy stocks from outside sources. They'll watch that other Kramer guy, or people will be talking about it, or it'll be on Bloomberg or the news or a message board or a YouTube channel, and somebody will talk about it, and then you get the idea, and then so you're already kind of listening. Usually they almost never tell you to sell. I seem like the only person that tells people that selling is something's overvalued or whatever, but so you kind of get the sales pitch before you've actually looked at the stock, and that can kind of prime you in the wrong direction. What you want to be able to do is work independently by yourself, no matter what anybody else says about anything. And you want to develop strategies that you understand and you feel comfortable with, and that you have some confidence in, that not every single time it will work, but the majority of the time it will work out over the medium term, right? So you want to invert the way that you come about these ideas, and instead of positively identifying an idea, a stock investment, you want to work negatively, like flip that around. You want to identify via elimination. So start with a group of stocks, know your strategy, and then start by eliminating all the ones that don't meet the requirements for your particular strategy. And I use multiple strategies, so sometimes a stock doesn't fit one strategy, but it might fit a different strategy. The vast majority of stocks are going to be low quality for me that I look at, or there's not going to be enough data for the particular strategy, and that's fine. You're not going to get every idea. You kind of have to accept that. You're not going to get every winner. You don't need a strategy that tries to get every winner, because it'll have a high failure rate if you're trying to capture every single one. It's more important to avoid the bad than it is to positively identify like the biggest winners. It's good to try to get those big winners, but you do it in a roundabout way so you don't screw up and get sucked into all these other stories and ideas that everybody else is trying to sell you, right? So if you watch this channel, you'll see me use, I call it the full cycle strategy. It's an earnings and earnings growth based strategy. Basically a growth at a reasonable price strategy is the main strategy I talk about. I have another one I use for cyclical stocks and cyclical businesses that I share publicly. And then I have a couple more that are in my private service, okay? But we're just going to focus on the main one. I've already made probably 70 videos or more on this in the past few months with this particular strategy. So you want to have one recession's worth of data. You want earnings to not be too cyclical. So you want earnings growth not to have declined more than 50%. So if you look at 3M during this time frame, the worst is like 11% and 9%. You want that to be less than 50. If you're new at this, you may even take it like less than 35, honestly, because you have to make some adjustments for those. But I'm keeping this very simple, okay? And you want earnings to be predictable, so that you don't want them to really be like super jaggedy. So what we see with 3M here would be fine. It's pretty smooth. And then you want earnings growth over the time period to be greater than 4%, I would say, during this time period, just as your initial run through. So remember, you're not trying to positively identify what the good businesses are going to be. You're trying to eliminate the ones that don't fit whatever strategy you decide to use. And screeners aren't usually very good at that because most of them are not going to go back far enough in time. The last real recession we had was in 2008. I don't really count the 2021. And in this example that I'm about ready to show you guys, I'm going to use the time frame starting pre-COVID from 2019. So this would be like January 2020. This is what I would be looking at when I sat down to analyze stocks with this particular strategy. I'm going to use the S&P 500 as the pool, the universe of stocks that I'm going to choose from. I think that's a really good one to start with for individual investors because the reasons the S&P 500 outperforms most other funds and money managers over the long term is three things. The low fees or no fees if you buy an index fund. The quality of the businesses, the screening process that the S&P 500 committee uses for quality is basic, but it's pretty good. So they have to have enough quality to get in there at least minimally. And they also let their winners run. So whatever the Magnificent Seven is doing right now, the S&P 500 is capturing all of that, right? And those are the three reasons why the S&P 500 is a good pool of stocks. If you're just starting out, it's just really the quality is the main reason, but they also just let the winners kind of evolve themselves and they let the losers fall out themselves, right? So there's about 500 stocks in the S&P 500. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to run through about 50. I think there's actually 53. I'm going to start with 3M, which is a number, and then I'm going to go through the alphabet from Wikipedia, and I'm going to go through all the ones that the company names start with A. And I did a quick count. I think it's about 53. I'm just going to use this single strategy, and I don't know what the results are going to be. I'm just going to keep track of the ones that make it through this basic screen. So this is about 10% sample of the whole S&P 500. Pretty much randomly chosen, so I'm just going in alphabetical order. And we'll start with 3M. So just to show you how fast you can work, I've done this with thousands of stocks, okay? And these are you're gonna get a lot more keepers out of the S&P 500 than you are. 9 out of 10, probably, maybe 8 out of 10 are gonna immediately get eliminated when you start going through just the vast majority of the stocks in the market. So again, the three things we want are available data that include a recession, not too cyclical or erratic in terms of earnings, and earnings growth over 4%. And I'm not going to do any fancy earnings growth stuff for this. Remember, we're just narrowing down a list. So this list will get smaller when you go back through with more filters. And this isn't even going to do any valuation. So I'll look at the earning. I'll look at whether the data there is there. I'll look at the drawdown. I'll look at whatever the earnings growth is on Fast Graph. If it meets all those as of January 2020, it passes. It's worth going through another round of evaluation. If not, it's just too hard. Doesn't mean it's not going to be a winner. It just means for this strategy, the data's not there or whatever. Okay? So 3M, we just saw, works. And I'm just going to tally them up here as I go through to see how many we filter out of these 50 or so. So AOS is the next one. Okay, so pretty big drawdown here, but not over 50. None of these are over 50, and I have all the data. Earnings growth is 13%, so that's a second one that passes. Next, Abbott, ABT. Okay, again, no big drawdowns. All that looks good. Earnings growth is 7%. That one passes. AbbVie. This might have changed since 2020, but we'll just use whatever we get here. Okay, so on this one, there's no recession data, so that one doesn't pass. I think they had like a split or something. Accenture, ACN. And it doesn't mean they're not a good company. It just means you don't have the data for this particular strategy. This one looks really clean. Earnings growth is 14%. That one passes. Adobe. Okay, so this is a little sketchy right here, but it's not quite 50%, so it still passes and the earnings growth is fine. So it passes, but if you did, when you're doing your research, you want to try to figure out what was going on here with earnings. There's probably an explanation for it. AMD, too cyclical, doesn't pass. AES. Okay, this one is a little interesting. So cyclicality is okay. Earnings growth is going to be a little sketch. Okay, it barely passes. If we brought this to 2006, it wouldn't pass. So this probably shouldn't pass, but I'm going to count it since I'm just doing a standard 2004 start point. Okay, where are we at? Aflac. Aflac looks good. Earnings growth 10%, no big drawdowns. That one's good. Allegiant, A. Okay, so this one's too cyclical, so it doesn't pass. APD, which I just made a video on, I think. A little bit of cyclicality, but growth is over 8%. So that one's good. Airbnb, they weren't public, so I can tell you right now they aren't going to pass. AK Akamai. No big drawdowns in earnings. Earnings growth is good. That one passes. Albemarle, they're going to be too cyclical, but I'll pull this one up. So, oh, maybe not over this period. Yeah, so over this particular period, they actually didn't quite have enough earnings cyclicality. And that would come afterwards. So, or if you go back farther in time. So it would be okay. Earnings growth is okay. You'd have to do more research to discover that it is actually deeply cyclical. Sometimes that happens. So these guys are a REIT, so you don't use earnings for REITs. So they don't pass. ALGN, I have a separate strategy for REITs. ALGN, Align. I owned this one for a while. Did good on it. So during this particular time period, they actually did have a big drawdown. So I would, again, this is sort of the opposite of what I was saying with whichever one I just had up here that passed, that had slow earnings growth. On this one, since this is different than like the actual recession, if you were starting in 2006, it would be okay. So it's not going to pass this time, but probably in real life, I would look closer at that one. Okay, let's see. ALLE. Okay, not enough data, so it doesn't pass. Alliant Energy. My energy provider. A little cyclicality here, but it's okay. Earnings growth is 7, so that's okay. It's another one that passes. Google. Both Googles, both tickers. So it does have recession data, so that one's good. Although they were a pretty small company then, so I think in the next recession they might not be as stable. Altria. Very stable earnings. Earnings growth 9%, so that one's passes. Amazon. Okay, earnings fluctuate a lot, so this one wouldn't pass. It's kind of an unusual one, but at that point in time, because they weren't really earning anything, They would not pass AMCR, which is fine because this is an earnings-based strategy. Not enough data, doesn't pass. AEE. Too big of a decline, not enough earnings growth probably either. Yeah, 0.8, so it doesn't pass. American Airlines. Too cyclical, doesn't pass. They probably went bankrupt. Let's see, where are we at? American Power, AEP. Earnings growth, 3%, doesn't pass. American Express. Earnings growth, too cyclical, doesn't pass. American Tower is a REIT, doesn't pass. Wait, AIG, sorry, I skipped that one. AIG, total failure. They didn't. I guess they didn't go bankrupt, but they don't pass. Let's see, AMP. Wait, no, American Waterworks. AWK. Very steady earnings growth. They don't actually have data that shows you how cyclical they were. So I would actually say these guys don't pass because they need to go back to at least 2007. Let's see, where are we at here? Did I miss any? I don't think so. AMP. Earnings too, is this shortened for some reason? Yeah, maybe I screwed that up. Somehow it got shortened. Maybe by one of those other ones. AMP, too cyclical. Let me go back and check AWK to make sure it actually didn't have the data. Yeah, it really doesn't. Okay. So we're still good. AMP doesn't pass. AME. Okay, these guys have a little bit of cyclicality, but everything looks good. We need to shorten this down to 2019, like I said. Okay, that looks good. Earnings growth looks good, so that one passes. All right. Where are we at now? Amgen, AMGN. Okay, earnings growth looks very steady. Looks big enough, they pass. Next one, Amphenol, APH. Okay, a little moderate cyclicality. Earnings growth is good, that looks good, they pass. Let's see, where are we at? Analog devices, ADI. Okay, I'm gonna call this, well, I said 50%, so that's not more than 50%, so that's okay. Earnings growth, okay, we'll call that a pass. Let's see, ANSS. That all looks very steady. Earnings growth is 18%. That's a pass. Let's see, AON. Almost through our 50 stocks already. This one looks like a pass. APA. Okay, this one looks terrible, so fail. Apple. Has a little bit of cyclicality. Earnings growth's okay. That one passes. Applied Materials. Too cyclical, doesn't pass. APTV. Too cyclical, doesn't, well, that's 2020. Doesn't have enough data though, so it doesn't pass. Arch Capital, ACGL. I'm going to call from peak to trough, too cyclical, so it doesn't pass. ADM. Probably here to trough is too cyclical. Or not enough. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to call that too weak. And really, if you look at the earnings growth from like here to there, that's going to be too weak. So I'm going to call this one not a pass. Let's see. The earnings were too volatile is how I would say it. So not enough data, doesn't pass. AJG. Too big of a decline here, doesn't pass. AIZ. Again, we have a whole period with like no earnings growth, a pretty big decline here. I would say these are not dependable enough earnings to pass. AT&T. Earnings growth 4.9%. It would actually pass unless we started here. So I'm going to go ahead and count that one as a pass since most of these borderline ones I've been avoiding. Atmos Energy, ATO. Looks like a utility probably. It passes. Autodesk. They're probably not even public then. Oh, I was wrong about that, but way too big of a decline there, so they fail. APD. That looks pretty good. Was that the right one, or where was I at? ADP, sorry. ADP, very smooth. These guys pass. Okay, we're getting down toward the end here. AutoZone, they're gonna pass. Okay. Avalon Bay, real estate doesn't pass. AVY, I think it's got cyclical. Let's take a look though. Yep, too cyclical, doesn't pass. And Axon, AXON. Okay, really not predictable earnings and cyclical, so doesn't pass. Okay, so I just ran through over 50 stocks. Not sure how long we've been running here, but it doesn't take too long to do. By my count, there were 24 stocks out of those 50 that passed. That's about half. This is actually pretty accurate. Between this and my deep cycle strategy, the deep cycle strategy has several dozen more stocks from the S&P 500 that would pass. Even though they're cyclical, they're pretty strong. So my experience is that about half of the S&P 500 will either pass the test for this strategy and the deep cyclical combined. Now, some of these that passed on the quick read through, when I go through and adjust for things like share buybacks, changes maybe in debt or too much debt, they can adjust those earnings, that earnings growth number. Like AT&T will definitely fail. There'll be more that fail after that. But if we add the deep cyclical strategy with high quality deep cyclicals, then that brings it up to about half of the S&P 500 will fit these two strategies. Probably about maybe 35 to 40% would fit just the full cycle strategy. Now, if you went to the Russell 2000 and did this, or the S&P 500 mid cap or small cap, especially the small cap, only 10% of companies would pass at most, probably. Almost all of them will fail. So maybe I would have been better off by running through one of those and doing a sample there. But even in a high quality index, you're only going to get about 40% to 50% that maybe pass these basic strategies. That doesn't mean they're bad companies, but the data usually isn't there historically to prove that they were good companies that could survive a bad recession and still grow coming out of it. So history is usually the best guide for the future. if you use a few other layers of protection, usually like 80% of the time, history is going to help predict roughly what the future is going to look like for a business over the next like 5 years, 5 to 10, give or take. So, but you can see how fast you can work through these stocks. And if you only want quality ones, it's going to go pretty fast. Almost all of them are going to come from the S&P 500. I would say, well, including all of my strategies, there's only about 600 stocks that I track that I have actual buy prices on, probably only like 300 or 350. Now I haven't looked at every single stock in the world, but I've looked at a lot of them. And the vast majority of the time, they just don't have the quality that I look for, that where I know they can consistently grow earnings at a rate better than inflation. So when you consider there's, like 7,000 basic stocks, I think, and then maybe 12,000 total around the world or something. I'm just kind of throwing out rough numbers. If I'm roughly tracking 600 in case some of the quality improves for some of them, and I'm seriously have buy prices on half of that at like 3 or 350, it's a very small percentage of stocks that are going to be worth an individual investor's time if you're investing for that medium term time frame and you're looking for quality businesses. Quality businesses that have a history of being quality businesses. There's a whole other group where you can try to predict what will be the future ones, and that's much more difficult to do. It's not impossible, but it's harder, and if I was just starting out investing, those would not be the ones that I would look at. If you take just the S&P 500, you have a really good benchmark that you can benchmark your positions against if you're trying to learn how to do this. And so if you pick something from the S&P 500 and compare it to the index over the next 5 years, you can see how it did compared to probably like an equal weight S&P 500 would be the way to go. RSP is the ticker for that. And you could say, okay, I picked 20 stocks myself over this period, and over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, this is how they did relative to the index. You can get an idea of whether you can actually do this and whether it's worth your time to do it. You can learn from your mistakes as long as you take like small positions. I usually take like 1% or 2% weighted positions out of a portfolio, because that allows me to go back and look and see, okay, I have a method that I'm using here. How is it doing? How many data points do I have that I can look at over time to see if it's working? And then is there any patterns for these ones that are working extra well or really failing? Like, is there anything they have in common? So you can keep learning along the way, and then over time, as you do it, you'll get better. And then once you feel really confident, then you can step outside the S&P 500 and start looking for maybe some smaller ones that might have been missed a little bit. But they're pretty hard to find, honestly. But they're out there. There are a few of them. Really, the way to think about it is which one of these are going to be future S&P 500 stocks, right? And if you can start kind of learning how to identify those earlier and earlier, that's a really good way to make money, but it's harder. You're going to have more failure, and you have to have a pretty good system in place where you're feeling pretty confident about it. But what I wanted to show you here is it's okay to eliminate stocks quickly, the ones that aren't worth your time. There might be good ones in there, but you want a high batting average. You want to have a confidence in your system. So it's okay to just I could look at this stock and say, I am not interested in this. I don't know anything about this business, but I know I'm not interested in it because it doesn't meet what I'm looking for. And I can tell that in like less than 5 seconds by looking at this fast graph. And I'm not affiliated with fast graphs, but it only costs like $16 a month or something, I think. And for the basic version, which is just what I've been using here, which is a really cheap tool to be able to, imagine going and getting 53 10Ks or whatever and looking up the information that I just went through in just a few minutes here. So the amount of time saved and you can learn patterns. So what happens is when you do this 1,000 times, which isn't really that long. I mean, we're talking a few days of work if you're doing it all the time, but you could do it for like 20 minutes a day or whatever, and you'll start noticing patterns after a while if you just keep doing this. I mean, I definitely did. Especially in retrospect, you can see, oh, so this ended up failing, you'll know, and you can kind of see what was going on sometimes. Or you can investigate it a little bit more. So I hope you found this helpful. It's going to be the 4th part of this series of not getting your stock ideas from the media. Just go through yourself, know what you are looking for, know the pitch you want to hit. And just because somebody else might be able to hit a more difficult pitch doesn't mean you have to start swinging at those, because you might not be able to do it the same way that they can. All right, well, if you found this helpful, hit the subscribe button. Go watch the other videos. I'm going to throw this on the playlist with them. And drop a comment if you have any suggestions about future videos, and maybe I'll make one if people want to see it. All right, see everybody later. Bye.